Hi all, I have another exciting notable game to show you today. This is of Anthony Miles, so Tony Miles, and it was played in 1980. He was playing black against none other than Anatoly Karpov, who was 2.725 at the time. Miles was 2.545. Miles was the first UK-born over-the-board chess grandmaster, narrowly beating Raymond Keane to this achievement. He, the naturalised German-born Jacques Mises, was awarded the GM title in 1950, whilst Keith Richardson had been awarded the GM title for correspondence chess earlier in the 1970s. But for Miles's achievements of becoming a sort of modern over-the-board grandmaster, he won a £5,000 prize put up by the wealthy businessman and chess backer Jim Slater. Okay, so Miles had a string of good results in the late 70s and 80s, and it seemed to be the precursor to an explosion of a number of strong British players. Shortly after Miles became a GM, then there was Raymond Keane, Michael Steen, who did that classic book Simple Chess, which by the way you can download from Kindle. I've got it. John Nunn, Jonathan Spillman, and a number of others followed his example. And he had started beating a number of world-class players, including former world chess champions such as Smyslov, Tao and Spassky. So here he was in 1980 playing against Anatoly Karpov, European Team Championship, Soviet Union versus England. Okay, let's see what happened in this game. Anatoly Karpov kicked off with e4, and already a massive surprise on a gigantic scale. Miles, instead of playing a classical move like e5 or the Sicilian, he played actually a6. And you may wonder what this is. Well, St George's defence is one name for it. a6. It's thought by some to be a bit weaker than b6 in a way, because if the idea is to fianchetto the bishop, it's going a long way around it. b5 then bishop b7, the other way is quicker. But on the other hand, if you have a pawn on b5, you can play b4 and kick a knight, which might actually make the fianchetto more effective. So there's some pros and cons here. Is it an upgrade or a downgrade on b6, the Owens defence? So anyway, Karpov has been known to sometimes be rattled by unusual openings, sometimes. So d4 plays classically, just puts two pawns in the centre. b5, so there's this possibility, knight c3 of b4 all the time. So Karpov doesn't actually feed this pawn anything. He plays knight f3 for the moment. After bishop b7, he supports the e-pawn with bishop d3. Now we see knight f6, and he supports the e-pawn again with queen e2. And now e6. So there's a possibility now of c5. And also c4 actually. With this configuration here, it's slightly got an issue with c4 incoming, potentially to trap the bishop. So White's going to be aware of this c5, a little bit more effective perhaps than usual in this position. White plays a4, trying to weaken Black's queen sides, and also try and gain some key squares. Here now, this is ignored though, because c5 does threaten c4. We have d takes c5, and now bishop takes c5. Yes, there's pressure on e4, compensating for the pressure here. It's too dangerous for White to try and win material in this position, and it looks too premature to play e5 as well. It's not a position you really want to try and win material from here. White, for the moment, guards the e4 pawn with knight bd2. And now finally, something's done about this, b4, but it does concede the c4 square. On the other hand, look at Black's bishops. They seem nicely placed. Black's got active pieces here at the opening. It's not too bad. Now here, White tries for an attacking bind with e5, but he is giving up that d5 square. The knight goes there and threatens immediately knight f4. White parries this with knight e4, and it seems perfectly logical White's play at this point. Bishop e7, both sides seem to be playing very logically. So against this bishop threat, bishop retreating, covering these squares. Is this pawn strong or weak on e5? At the moment it seems pretty good. On the other hand, this knight seems quite well placed, given this pawn's actually kind of indirectly guarding the knight against c4s, or slowing the kicking away of the knight down quite considerably. It's staying there for a moment. White castles, knight c6, putting some pressure on e5, not going for casting immediately, and things like queen c7 and queen b8 could put more pressure on e5. So White has to try and parry this, otherwise that e5 pawn is looking a bit on the dodgy side. Another part of this configuration now, which is an issue, is this knight interrupting the queen's protection of e5. Is it going to move back? Maybe it could just move back at some point. But we see bishop d2 here, preparing actually c4 to try and kick this knight away, challenge it. If it's seen as one of Black's best pieces. We have queen c7 looking at e5. Now White didn't just humbly try and protect the e5 pawn by moving the knight back. He actually plays c4. He wants to kick away this knight. We have b takes c3. Knight takes c3, challenging the knight and protecting e5. Knight takes c3, bishop takes c3. Now, although White has basically strengthened, overprotected this strong point, which Nimzowitsch talks a lot in overprotection, especially the e5 point, there's a slight downside in White's position now with that earlier a4. That b4 square is a square that Black can at least celebrate so far, and he does so with knight d4. It's quite weakened. And the bishops are not too bad, especially this one is looking actually quite healthy on the diagonal. Black is immediately threatening, of course, to take and just plonk the bishop on d5 next. So what does White do? Well, he plays actually bishop takes b4, slightly weakening his dark squares with this. But the idea is fast development, rook ac1, and piece pressure. And it seems fairly dangerous, and now trying to challenge this bishop on this diagonal. Now here, Black castles, not fearing a Greek gift. A Greek gift is technically possible here, and it might offer White a tiny advantage from an engine perspective. You know, the Greek gift, bishop takes h7. It's not completely convincing. I just want to quickly show you. Bishop takes. It wasn't played, but just imagine takes. Knight g5 in the game was played. Okay, but king takes, knight g5, bringing the king out, because otherwise this is like terminal. But now queen d3 check. Now f5 here, otherwise if king takes, then rook c4 is really dangerous. This is winning for White. It's crushing. So f5 here, queen g3, threatening knight takes e6, queen d4, trying to get in front to defend like this. And White, although might have a technical advantage, Black's going to be a difficult nut to crack in this position with the bishop here. It's not so clear. So anyway, knight g5 was played by Karpov, avoiding the complications. He's known to like, logical, clear paths to playing the position. Knight g5 just creating some weaknesses, probing. H6, and we have actually, instead of the knight retreating, bishop h7 check, putting the king on h8, and now bishop b1, with the idea of the battery to mate Black, and also, of course, well, h takes g5 is a mate in 2. So this looks like a nifty idea to put the king on h8 and just retreat the bishop. We have a calm defense move, bishop e7, preparing to answer queen d3 with g6. Slightly weakening squares, but it's not so bad. So here, knight e4, rook ac8. Black has some pressure here. It's not just b4's like weak slightly, but d4. The queen can pounce the d4 at some point to hit e5, and the queen's also looking at b2. This is quite an annoyingly placed queen, basically on b6. Very logically placed queen. But White now, Karpov, plays very aggressively. Perhaps the best thing to do here would be to avoid the exchange of rooks and play rook cd1. Just hitting d7 and then queen d3, and it's not so bad. But Karpov, perhaps a bit rattled by the unusual opening, plays queen d3. So yes, threatening batteries against to mate on h7. But a calm reply, rook takes c1. Rook takes c1. And another calm reply here in the face of this mating idea, just queen takes b2. Yes. Has Karpov played this a little bit unsoundly now? Because now it's a double attack on c1 and e5. The backdrop to this is this mating thing, but White's not given enough time. Here, queen takes e5 is played now, pinning the knight actually. So on knight move, we can just take on e1 now. So Karpov has lost a pawn or two. How many pawns? He takes back one pawn, but Black's got the nice bishop pair. And it looks as though the bishops are forked, but a counter-attack on the rook leaves Black solid pawn up with the bishop pair. It's a miracle. He's played an unorthodox opening and received here a fantastic position out of it as a reward. Queen d5. So there's queen d1, threatening if the queen moves, and also this battery. So basically queen takes d5 looks fairly forced. Bishop takes d5. Black's just better. So at move 29 now, knight c3, rook c8, probing that back row for a moment. Knight e2, protecting c1. But now g5, yes, the king might be becoming active in the game soon. h4, we have king g7, h takes, and Black might be able to use this h file later. Bishop d3. Hitting the pawn, that's moved. Black has a very comfortable position, brings the king up to protect the pawn. Bishop d6, centralizing, taking that h file now. f4 was played by Karpov, weakening his pawns a bit. Bishop moves, hitting a4, that's protected indirectly. Check. But the g2 pawn is weak. And now, after bishop f3, this g3 pawn now placed is weak. It's attacked, it's victimized. So Black wrenches out another pawn here forcefully. So two pawns up, opposite colours bishops. But it's pretty hopeless actually. After bishop c7, Karpov resigned. A staggering win considering the highly controversial opening. So against the player over 2700 to play a really surprise weapon. As I say, I think Wiki's slightly wrong. It's not necessarily an upgrade on the Owens defense because it provides the b4 possibilities all the time, this opening. Very interesting opening. Basically, Karpov didn't really refute it or even gain a solid positional advantage. It seemed he had an aggressive setup, but yeah, he could have played the attack more calmly without losing a couple of pawns unnecessarily. It seems he was prompted into a major blunder in this game of a couple of pawns and never really got an attack. And yeah, Black just had a beautiful position with the bishop pair, pawn up, which later became two pawns up, to reach this kind of lost position here. It's just the grind. The pawns are just gonna. It's just a grandmaster technique from here. These pawns are just gonna come. It's pretty hopeless. Okay, I hope you got something out of that. It's a shocker. It's a famous game, shocker, and as a result of this game, it started to be known as the Birmingham defence after Anthony Miles's hometown, Birmingham. Not just the St George's defence. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.